All right, Daniel, I start this podcast after I get fired by Kane Anderson, and I think it's going to be 13-year-old me telling poopy jokes, because I got this wonderful, great sense of humor. And when I started it, the industry actually was in the doldrums, right? We'd had minus $37 oil and half the industry had been fired. And so it became more serious. I've just had a lot of therapy in my life and I'm happy to talk about it. So I do all that. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that I would do a podcast on kelp. I didn't even know what kelp is. This is the second kelp podcast I've done over time. Good. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, pleasure, Chuck. Thanks very much.
Now, who are y'all? What do y'all do?
So we grow giant kelp, so the type that you'll see off California, the sort of 50-foot high rainforest jungle sort of trees with thick canopy. So we grow that species. And we grow it because it's an enormous sort of biodiversity booster. You get hundreds and hundreds of species which feed in there and thrive in there and feed on each other. And because it sequesters carbon. And to fund all that, we cut the canopy and we turn that into products. Basically, our first product is an agricultural input, let's say a fertilizer substitute, to keep things simple. Kelp juice that makes plants grow faster, grow better yields for a farmer, better soil health. So there's both instant and long-term benefits for the customer.
So growing kelp, I'm imagining like wires that you drape it over out in the ocean? How does that work?
Yeah, so kelps have a what's called a holdfast, which is a sort of claw-like foot that holds onto a rock. And we grow them in a lab, in a hatchery, till they're about 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters. What's that, like a quarter of an inch, I think?
Yeah.
And then we plant them out either on lines, so long polystyrene lines, or on blocks that we place on the seabed.
Okay. What part of the world is this growing in? Is this, you need to be in warm water?
No, you'll need cold water.
Okay.
So they're happy in 7 to 16 degree water. I have no idea what that is off the top of my head in Fahrenheit. I think it was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit max.
It's still cold.
Yeah,
cold water.
Like you can swim in it, but you won't want to be in there very long.
Yeah.
Any warmer than that, and they struggle to get nutrients because other critters will have eaten all the nutrients faster. And so any warmer than that, and they'll shrivel up and die. So
what is that? Is that North Sea?
It's the one area in the world where it's not endemic is Northern Atlantic. Okay. So it's basically the whole Pacific coast of the Americas in the right temperature bandwidth. So Alaska all the way down to California, and it goes as far south as California because of the cold currents that come up there. And then there's a little pocket in Peru caused by like equatorial upwelling, very susceptible to El Nino and La Nina. And then it starts again farther south in Chile and goes all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. And then you get pockets of it around the Antarctic drift, so all the islands, point of Southern Africa, Tasmania, New Zealand. So, yeah.
So how does that work? You license from the government, in effect, some of the ocean to drill? How far offshore are you?
At the moment, we're pretty close to shore. So in Namibia, we won't be any further than, let's say, 3 nautical miles off the coast. So you can see the dunes, you can see the desert, and you get a license from the Ministry of Fisheries, much like you would if you're a mussel farm or an oyster farm. Alaska, we're a bit more inside. We're not on the open ocean because it gets too rough there and the seabed's too rugged. New Zealand, we're licensing also relatively close to shore. So every country is a bit different.
Okie doke. And so what's a growing season like? Meaning you're planting these things at 2 to 3 millimeters. How long before I, in effect, harvest them and sell them?
5 months.
Really?
Till they're sort of 100-foot long, weighing 1,000 pounds plus.
Really? It grows that quickly?
I mean, it's a jungle behemoth that grows like overnight pretty much.
And as I recall, there are different types of kelp. There's brown kelp, red kelp.
Yeah, so I mean, what we call seaweed is basically anything plant-like in the ocean. And from red seaweeds, which can be tiny and look a bit like crinkled pubic hair, you can go to brown kelps like the ones we were growing. And that's as much genetic diversity as between a rabbit and elephant. You know, they're really quite different species.
Oh, that's fascinating. And so you plant them 5 months later, you're out there harvesting them. What's the processing like on that? Is you run it through a machine of some sort to create the fertilizer?
Yeah, so the species we picked, like giant kelp, we do because it grows faster than all the other seaweeds. Its niche is to grow and die quickly. Most seaweeds die because they get covered in other critters, um, snails, barnacles, bryozoans, which are sort of crustacean-like calciferous sort of creatures, or other seaweeds. And then eventually they just get weighed down by all this stuff that's trying to eat them. And so giant kelp's ecological niche is to grow really fast and to die really fast. And in the meantime, it's sending all the sugars down its stem to feed the little cousins and brothers in the dark. And so when it dies, new sunlight comes in and it grows back really rapidly. And so we make use of that by cutting the canopy just before it starts to die. And that actually makes the little baby plants grow faster because they get exposure to sunlight quicker. So it's a bit like if you've got a farm and you're cutting hay. If you get the right pattern of cutting hay, you can get more biomass. If you cut too fast, you're limiting the growth, and if you cut too slowly, then your hay is both very thick and regrowth is also slower. So that's sort of the thing that also makes it really different from growing other seaweeds is one that you plant it once and then it lives forever. Well, forever. You can harvest the same plant for a very long time. And the second is that you can harvest it mechanically. So you sail through it with basically like a mower, like you would use for barley or wheat. And then you cut off the canopy and you process that.
Oh wow, that's pretty fascinating. And how I have no concept of how big a market this might be. I mean, fertilizer, it seems like it's a huge market.
Yeah, huge. And fertilizers, I don't know, runs in the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars.
Nice.
Globally. And so I mean, it's not a silver bullet that replaces all other agricultural inputs, right? It's one of the tools in the toolkit of the farmer. But it's a big market that we can address.
Yeah, but that's not the end game, right? I mean, ultimately, isn't this kind of save the earth, sequestering carbon potentially? Is that the home run case here?
What excites us most is the biodiversity boost. And that's also much more visible when you jump into a kelp forest. You just see it teems with life. There's all these life forms that are sheltering there and living off each other. And that has a regional impact. So sardines, for example, that were wiped out by overfishing in our Namibian waters, if they lay their eggs in a kelp forest, which they will do by preference, those eggs have 1,000 times higher success, like survival rate, than if they just lay them free floating in the ocean. So the speed at which a kelp forest of size can help to restore an ecosystem is pretty phenomenal in the ocean because the whole thing teems with life and the cycles are so fast. So that's what really excites us. Like carbon is of course the sexy topic of the day in some circles, but it's invisible. It's like a waste problem that you can't really see. So while I think anybody with his head screwed on right can see that this is a problem that needs addressing, it's also very intangible. It's chemistry. It's something that humans should be able to fix fairly easily, and so that doesn't give us as much excitement as the biodiversity does, which you see as soon as you jump in the water. But ultimately, the way I look at it, that all may be the case, but the only way you fund vast kelp forests is by mobilizing a lot of capital. And if you want to mobilize a lot of capital, you're going to have to show people a return for it. So we're pretty agnostic to the reasons why our investors want to put money in. I guess some of my younger staff, when I say, look, why don't we talk to, let's say, Shell Nature-Based Solutions, they're like, oh, let's not talk to Shell. They're the dark side. And okay, I worked for the dark side for 20 years, and it's a great company, but full of great people. But B, if you really think that the world needs to change, what better way than to pull capital from things that you think are not productive for the planet towards things that are?
And I think ultimately, when you look at the world and how we're going to save the planet and all that, I believe you're right in that ultimately, if this is a huge problem, we actually deal with huge problems pretty well in the
Yeah.
United States. We're crappy day to day. We don't do
Yeah.
day to day very well, but throw the Nazis at us and we will go win. I mean, we mobilize things, take care of problems.
But
And
you remember what Churchill said in that exact context, is that the Americans can always be relied on to do the right thing. The problem is they'll try everything else first.
My girlfriend's British. I'm surprised I haven't heard that a million times.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's exactly right. So you were a Shell guy?
Yeah, I spent 20 years at Shell.
Yeah. So wander me through your career in terms of how you got from Shell to the sea. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so I finished school at 16 and a half and went to Russia for a gap year. I'd been doing Russian at school. My father had been in military intelligence, so I wanted to be a spy.
Where were you from growing up?
I'm Dutch, but grew up in Dubai in Canada, and my father is a banker and a sort of general entrepreneur. So this was at a school in Canada, hence the sort of, you can pick up some Canadian accent here and there.
So I can't, my girlfriend's British and I'll meet somebody from England and she'll be so offended that I can't detect the accent, what regional dialect of British it is. And I'm like, outside America, I don't know. So I don't pick up that well.
Yeah, no,
but I won't
insult you.
insult
I've lived in so many places that it's sort of a mongrel accent of all sorts of things.
My understanding is if you're from London, to be called Australian's the worst you can do in terms of interpreting an accent. So we'll leave that alone.
So anyway, I went to Russia for a year, and that was just as the Soviet Union had fallen over, so early 90s. And then picked up sculpting there and did my degree in engineering, offshore technology, back in the Netherlands, and then was a sculptor for a couple of years, and then actually went in
an artist, sculptor,
making
cool,
figurative realist, like bronze busts of people's faces.
Oh, no way! Interesting.
So an unusual dying art. But living in Amsterdam and The Hague, encircled by other artist friends, didn't feel like I was really very alive, because you don't see much suffering or. The big problems of life aren't that apparent in rich places like that. And so I wanted to see a bit more of the world again. And my girlfriend, who then became my wife, who then became my ex-wife, was working at Shell. And she said, why don't you join the drilling industry? You're qualified for it, you'd like it, and then you see some strange and interesting places. So that's what led to me applying to Shell and joining their drilling program. And that brought me to...
How does that job interview go? What have you been doing? Well, I've been sculpting.
Well, it's very interesting, actually, because that job interview didn't go very well at all. So much later, when I joined Shell, I trained to be an interviewer myself, and they have a fairly involved form of interview, which, without going into too much details, basically the precept is you come in and they pick a topic that has nothing to do with oil or engineering, and you just dig into how you think about things. And so here was this HR person and started saying, we're going to have a discussion about genetic engineering. I was like, I didn't come here to interview for that. Like, I don't know about that. No, that doesn't matter. Anyway, she didn't prepare me very well. So for why we were doing this, or I didn't listen to the first sentence. So halfway,
that was kind of your first clue that you missed.
This is a waste of time. Like, what am I doing here? And I got up and left. So then I think it was 18 weeks before I got a letter which said, thanks for coming, but no thanks. And my girlfriend, who knew the head of HR, said, look, how can we spend 18 weeks getting back to somebody? So he called me in and said, let's have a chat just so that I understand how people who are interviewing for a job here experience our service level, so to speak. And anyway, we sat there and talked for about 4 hours while chain smoking. That was still possible in Shell offices back then. And then at the end he said, actually, I'm going to overrule that. You're going to the assessment center anyway. And so I sort of snuck in by the back door.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
I still have the letter. I kept it. I thought, who knows, if I make it to CEO, then I should print that and put it on my my door.
I saved all my rejection letters from the investment banks.
Is that a big box, Chuck?
Yeah, it's a big box. Let me tell you. But no. So when I was running Kane Anderson, of course they all came in and wanted business.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can be pretty snarky and a bit of a prick, but even I didn't frame all the letters, but I thought about it. That would have been really cool. Which one were you again?
It's a sort of revenge fantasy that I guess never really matters that much once it gets down to it.
I do have one kind of thought, because you're CEO of a company. How many employees do you guys have?
We've got, I mean, if I include the research students that we sponsor and the school teachers, we also run a school who are on our payroll, then it's 100, just shy of 120.
Yeah. And I'm curious about this, because this is one of the things I think I messed up with in my career. And sorry, I have ADD and I didn't take my medicine this morning, so we're kind of bouncing around. But how many of those folks were you actively involved in interviewing and hiring? Because you had this experience at Shell. Did it drive you to do certain things when you had your own company?
Yeah, I mean, I initially everybody, and you sort of tell yourself this is really important that you interview absolutely everybody, and it is. But sadly, as you get bigger, at some point you just don't have the time, and people kind of sit around and wait for you. So of the staff, probably 40, 45,
a third of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Because one of the things I found in my career is I wound up delegating that quick, thinking, I was way too important and way too busy. And what I found is that I didn't get my team in place, at the end of the day. And so I struggled to maintain a culture around the place where, in hindsight, it should have been I should have been looking for things, my type of fit person in the interview, instead of, people walking in my office going, yeah, we interviewed 27 people. Here's number one. And I'd spend 10 minutes with them, So interesting. So back at Shell. So you got to work for Shell.
Yeah. So I went to work for Shell, had the intro courses. That's where I met some of the people who've introduced us today. And then went off to Nigeria for 3.5 years. So swamps, shallow offshore, great training ground because there's a lot of different stuff going on that's not planned. Also because I guess it's a bit like being an NCO during wartime, where all your officers get shot away above you. So you get promoted a lot faster because Nigeria has a way of sort of having a high attrition rate. Because it's tough and people don't, how do I put this politely? People don't find it very easy to work there, so they'll run to the next job as soon as they can. So within 8 or 9 months, I was drilling supervisor. You really don't know what you're doing then yet. And then, of course, the biggest mistake you first make is thinking, oh, I'm the boss now, I got to tell everybody what to do. But if you don't know what you're doing, then that goes wrong really, really rapidly. So it was a quick sort of baptism of fire to realize that maybe you should just ask people who do know what they're doing,
right?
What would be wise. And I think ever since my model has been to let the team make the plan. It's a pretty simple wisdom that strangely a lot of people don't follow. And every now and then I'll weigh in and start making plans again, and then those are always the one that go wrong.
Yeah.
So you got to let the team make the plan. They're going to execute it. You got to make them have them make decisions at the level where the info flows. That's not where I sit. I get very limited info. So
I always found that as kind of running the group too, that people only told me what they wanted me to hear.
Yeah. Or what they think you want to hear, which is even worse because that might even not be what you want to hear.
Yeah, and you'd sit there, and then when you'd finally sort to the bottom, it's like, guys, if you'd have just told me this, we could have done X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was that was always tough. Thank goodness I had a really good assistant. God love Stacy. who would come into my office and say, I don't think you're getting the full story on this, and be like, oh, okay. I was reading a fax, or I saw this. And so, no, that was always important.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So Nigeria was a great schooling ground in that sense. And also just great for sheer adventure. Like, it didn't always feel that fun, but I once spent a couple of days in a wooden cage in a village while they
decided
were discussing
what to do
how much
with
I
you?
was worth.
Really?
Well, I guess it was my first valuation discussion. It was also a cold shower. I think they asked for $1 million, and I thought, come on, I'm worth way more than that. And then ultimately, I think they settled for like $700, which
the ransom
very
of Red
disappointing.
Chief, basically.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to ask on that. I mean, literally, you were being held hostage. And,
in a wooden cage that wasn't long enough for me to lie down and sleep in with a bucket. So
oh my
could go to the
gosh,
toilet in full sight of everybody.
48 hours, 72 hours.
Well, almost 3 days. Yeah.
Oh
2.5
wow.
days. Yeah.
I don't even.
I mean,
I can't even imagine what goes through your head at that
A
point.
lot of different things.
Yeah, I bet so.
I mean, mainly I was terrified of getting malaria. And I'd stopped taking malarial medicine somewhere in my first hitch in Nigeria. I first took Lariam. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but Lariam is a heavy and cheap malarial drug, and it gives you really bad nightmares, which are super lucid. So I was taking this, and I was waking up. I mean, I was in a dream, but thinking that I was waking up on the rig in my room, picking up an 18-inch pipe wrench and wandering around, like clubbing people to death. And then waking up and thinking, where's all the blood? Like, it was so lucid that I thought I was going mad. So they took me off that, put me on Malaron. That gave me an upset stomach. So sort of 2 or 3 weeks into the tropics, I just stopped taking malarial drugs, which is really a stupid thing to do. But despite that, 8 years in total in the tropics, I never got malaria. So
Oh wow.
some luck going on there.
And I guess being although.
Or maybe mosquitoes just think I'm really filthy.
Yeah.
This guy stinks.
This guy looks skinny. He's not fat and delicious. Yeah, exactly. I took, what's the Q medicine? Isn't there one that starts with Q? That's
Quinine.
Yeah.
That's
I took that when I was going somewhere.
Yeah.
That was the recommended medication.
And quinine is still the treatment as well.
Oh, okay.
And quinine sits in your tonic. That's why people drink gin and tonics.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's an anti-malarial drug.
Oh, there we go. In addition to the sun never setting on the British Empire, I always thought that's why it was gin, but that makes sense. God, that's just crazy. I couldn't imagine being held hostage.
Yeah. It wasn't amusing at the time, but I mean, later it's a great story. So I don't know how you are these things. I just forget the bad stuff. I forget the names of people I don't like. That's great. You don't need to fret about revenge and be bitter. Yeah,
I'm pretty good at making myself a martyr by just having regular day-to-day occurrences. I don't think we need to add to it and actually get me held hostage by someone. Wow, that's crazy. So did you suddenly thereafter want out of Nigeria and move to the next one?
You wanted out of Nigeria all the time, but then the strange thing is that as soon as I'd get back to the Netherlands, I'd be like, I sort of miss the chaos. Like it's the whole adrenaline rush of all this crazy stuff going on is also fun.
I had one fella, and I'm blanking on his name. He was a really good dude who went to work for Shell as a subcontractor. I forget where. It might have been Nigeria right when COVID hit. And he got trapped, and he lived in Vietnam of all places. And because of COVID, couldn't go back home for a year. Wow. So wound up living in Turkey for a while, and then made his way. I think he was able to get to Singapore, but got stuck. Literally was out on the rig, and COVID was starting to hit, and rumors of shutdowns and the like. And walked in and said to his boss, "What should you do?" And he goes, "I'm surprised you're still here. Yeah. I'd get home." So, yeah. So where'd you go after Nigeria?
After Nigeria, I went back to Russia. So Shell had a joint venture there in Western Siberia, a place called Salim. So that was greenfield, taking sort of tundra and turning it into a functioning oil field. So great fun. running about 4 rigs and 18 workover units. Then I went to.
So what years is Russia?
2004, 2007, that sort of.
Okay. Early days of Putin.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so I'd been in Russia in 1991 or 2, Yeltsin just taking over. And then I'd been back mostly to various republics, mostly to Georgia and so the country, not the state, in the Caucasus, for most of that decade. So I followed the sort of transition from Yeltsin to Putin, and then about 2004, Putin started to become the sort of despot that he is now.
Right.
It was very noticeable. The trends, they used to play really bad Western pop music, and then suddenly overnight they were playing all these Soviet hurrah, semi-fascist greatest hits again.
What was there a specific event, or it just he got comfortable? And
I think he got comfortable and realized that nobody was going to remove him anymore.
Yeah.
Before that, he was still worried about various different factions, I think, but who knows what happens in the minds of people who have too much power.
Yeah, no doubt. I always find that fascinating in that on one hand you have the left saying that Trump is a stooge for Putin. You know, he's a plant, he's a secret ally or whatever. But then you look on the other hand, and it's Putin took Georgia under Bush, he took Crimea under Obama, and he invaded Ukraine under Biden. And it's not like Biden won the election and Putin went, "Oh, it'd be a great idea to march into Ukraine." I mean, he didn't take any land under Trump. And so I've always wondered, do you have any insight there in terms of who's right?
I don't think Putin's mathematics are really influenced very much by what president is in charge.
Really?
I think he rightly assesses that the West is not going to intervene in something that he does, and that he can go very far. Although, having said that, like the Georgian War, I was in Georgia at the time, and that stopped. The Russians stopped moving and advancing because so maybe a bit too much detail, but the Georgians had 3 battalions of well-trained troops, and 2 of those were in Iraq, where they were supporting the U.S. intervention, doing a handover. So the whole story that the Georgians started this war is obviously nonsense. You're not going to do that when 2/3 of your capable troops are out of the country. You're going to do that when you have all your capable troops. It's, if you're invading a country, you do it when 2/3 of the troops are out of the country, which is what the Russians did. And then the American Air Force general in charge of Iraq at the time flew those 2 Georgian battalions back and had them escorted by about 30 or 40 fighter jets, and flew them over the northern border of Russia and Georgia, so over the heads of the Russian invading troops, at quite a low altitude. And I remember sitting on our balcony while the war was going on, and these massive, must have been like 100 planes or something coming over to land. And that's when the Russians stopped. So, I think the U.S. can have enormous influence on these things, but it does require people to flex their muscles, and there's a lot of danger between 2 nuclear states when you do that. That Air Force general was rightly court-martialed. I mean, he was given a medal, but they held a court-martial to say, you did something that was high risk. And then they commended him for doing it because it ended well, which is good. So does Trump or no Trump have any influence on what Putin does? I don't know. I think at this stage, Putin is probably well beyond calculating anything like that into his calculus.
Yeah, that does scare me. I think you bring it up rightfully so. 2 nuclear powers. I mean, it's one slip, and that's bad. So so you were in Russia. Where'd you go from Russia?
From Russia, I spent a sort of sabbatical year in Georgia. I'd picked up a number of different businesses, and none of those were working very well because I was an absentee landlord. So I spent about 9 months wrapping all that up, while doing a bit of part-time work for Shell in Jordan, where I spent the next 8 years after that, which was an oil shale venture. So not coal seam shale, but oil shale, like in Colorado with the heaters. And the idea was to heat up kerogen, do what geology does in a couple of weeks instead of in 25 million years, and then extract the oil that way.
Did it wind up working?
I guess it probably could have worked. The view at the time was that we should be using Qatari gas to do it, and there was sort of 2 barrels of energy in and 1 to 3 barrels out, which never seemed very efficient. We were exploring doing it by circulating molten salt that you'd heat up in parabolic mirrors. I think that would have made it both more cost effective and lower sort of energy and carbon footprint. So no, it didn't end up working because it was way too cumbersome and expensive and technical. And given that I think we were going to build 10 trains in Jordan, and each train had a bigger carbon footprint than the whole of Shell worldwide, which bizarrely, so this is 2008, and I remember there were 2 of us, the senior sort of deal lead, and I were the only ones who'd occasionally say, guys, don't we think this carbon thing should be a little higher up on the risk register than number 150? And people would look at me, why do you think that? It's 2008. 6 years ago, obviously, it would have been pretty close to the top if you had a project with a carbon footprint like
1,
that.
2, and 3.
Yeah.
Well, back in 2008, I remember, we were just starting horizontal fracking, natural gas, and the kiss of death used to be if you drilled horizontally and found an oil well. Because it'd make 1,000 barrels of oil in the first day, and then 3 days later it'd be at 10 barrels a day, and that was just the worst thing ever. I mean, it took us a couple of years after that to figure out the proppant to actually hold open the formations.
Yeah, I remember all that.
And all, but you were trying everything back then of how we're out of oil.
Yeah.
Matt Simmons, Twilight in the Desert, peak oil, and all that. So. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Any good Jordan stories?
Jordan was, I think, one of the many highlights of our career, both professionally and privately. It's a really lovely country to live. Amazing people. I mean, rough neighborhood. You've got Syria, Iraq, Israel, Saudi. There's always some sort of major crisis going on, but Jordan is this little pocket of peace with super nice people, great sense of humor.
My girlfriend was a BBC reporter and covered the Middle East and lived in Jordan for a while. And she loves it. Yeah. She says it's her favorite place on the planet.
Yeah, I'd agree with her.
Yeah.
Gorgeous, the desert and the Dead Sea and the canyons. And fairly
Western, but just no resources, right?
Yeah.
They were kind of...
Well, maybe that's a blessing. I don't think they see it that way, but if you look at the nations around them that do have resources, it hasn't done them much good.
Yeah, that's true. So. That's very true. So then...
And Jordan was also professionally interesting because it was... So we were there to do, let's say, the exploration phase and map all this marine shale that would then be heated. And so we were drilling hundreds and hundreds of wells all over the country. And these are very shallow wells. It's inert. There's no oil and gas there, so you don't need blowout preventers. And so we did this crazy thing of looking at a different industry to see whether they were maybe smarter than us, which it's very difficult for the oil and gas industry to do that. It tends to be pretty arrogant about its technical skills. So I did a lot of scouting to Southern Africa to look at both water well drillers in really remote desert places that drill relatively deep, but particularly looking at continuous coring for the mineral exploration industry. So you've got oil and gas coring. I can't remember what it cost per meter, but $3,000 per meter, probably thereabouts. And then the people who explore for diamonds are, they're depressed if it costs more than $70 a meter. So who should be learning from who in this?
Right. Yeah.
So we researched that, and then we went back to Shell. We were all, the 3 of us who were running this, were about 29 or 30 years old. and went back to Shell and said, okay, we got a plan. We're going to buy rigs. We're going to design bespoke rigs. We're going to buy them. We're going to hire our own people, and we're going to do this all ourselves. And I guess you can imagine what sort of reception that got. I mean, we literally had older guys, slamming their fists on the table and enraged and saying, like, there's a reason we moved away from this. And what was the reason then?
Right.
I don't know. Unfortunately, we had a few people who said, well, let him try it. What's the problem? Like, he thinks he can do this for what effectively would be 10 times cheaper. Let him try it. Doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so we did, and we delivered that. So I think we were 10, 15 times cheaper than anybody thought we could be. So that's good. Like that's
great.
That's a real rush of professional pride when you achieve something like that. And you do it with the whole team that you've hired. Blue collars, mechanics, we're all part of the team. And it was just much more fun than getting contractors in. It was
I always had a view on our industry that I call us a lottery ticket industry, in that, because of so many things that can happen, the Saudis wake up in a bad mood and price of oil will triple, because you could literally just be drilling along and, oh, by the way, you hit a structure that nobody knew was there, et cetera. Because of that, you didn't really need to run a very efficient business, because at the end of the day, you just needed to be in the game when one of these big things happen. But to the extent it was 10 times cheaper, i.e. something that really moved the needle, we would do that better than anything on the planet. So, I mean, horizontal drilling, modern frac, what we've done with shale, I mean, that's a home run. So, of course, we're really good at it. Even to this day, I'm certain that some oil and gas companies still keep their books on a ledger, with pencils probably. And stuff. So
no, it's true. It's an industry that masks a lot of incompetence and a lot of huge competence behind the underlying oil price. Like you can do amazing things, but if the oil price drops, you're a loser. And you can do great things, or you can do really bad things, and the oil price goes up, and wow, you're the best manager there ever was. So I
always say that as entrepreneurial an industry as anyone on the planet, I'll put us up against Silicon Valley, any day with the amazing feats we can do.
Yeah, much more difficult. I mean, I learned this term recently called full stack execution. And basically it means that you've got to make sure the toilets are running, but it also means you need to keep your regulators happy, and everything in between in a highly technical business strikes me as a lot more difficult than software. But you're juggling 50, 60 balls at the same time, and you can't drop too many of them.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, people can die out on a rig. They don't really die unless they drink too much Mountain Dew in the software room code. And so, but what was the ultimate underlying, and if it's too technical, feel free to move on, but when y'all created the 10x cheaper drilling, what was the basics of what you figured out from the diamond guys to make that happen?
I don't think there's a single answer to that. Like there's 100 things that you look at and improve and fine tune, but the big step change is just approaching every problem in its most rigorously simple physics, chemistry, whatever it is. And then just cutting away all the middlemen, all the sort of transactional stuff that we do because we always did it. It's about cutting away stuff and just keeping the job front and central and executing the job, and that's it. No extra nice to haves, no this, no that. Just be really, really ruthless about what it is that you need to achieve, and then set out to achieve it.
Oh, nice.
That's and this is, I think, where people also struggled to see what it was that they were supposed to copy to achieve that elsewhere, because they'd sit down like, okay, what do we tell the contractors? Well, we didn't have contractors, so that inherent problem of having different value drivers, that any contractual relationship has that, you've removed that. And so you can really genuinely talk about what the end goal is that you're after, and then let the team figure out how to get there.
Interesting stuff. So, how do we get into the ocean with seaweed?
Yeah, same. So same way. It's also about being extremely clear about the why. Why are we doing this? For us, that's really about the biodiversity and the carbon. The money making side is absolutely essential because without it, you can't achieve your goal. And what we're doing is planting kelp forests. Everything else is peripheral.
Was there a spark? Was there you read an article somewhere? Was there
No, I mean, from Jordan, I went to Gabon, which was totally different. It was brownfield, fixing an old 50, 60-year-old shell company, which was struggling to make money in 2012, 13, when the oil price was, I think, $130 or $140 a barrel. So if you're struggling to make money in that environment, you've got a fundamental problem. So that was a great job. Very fun. I mean, not fun to have to lay off lots of people, but ultimately very rewarding as well. And then went to Australia, where I was based, but running a joint venture between Shell and the Chinese state, trying to do all sorts of innovation. So technical innovation, commercial innovation, electric fracs, various different things, automated rigs, machine learning. And while I was there, my wife went to a lecture by an Australian scientist about seaweed, and I'd been looking for different things to do for a while, just because the pace of a big behemoth like Shell I felt was a bit slow in decision making. Did I put that diplomatically enough?
Yeah, very diplomatically. So. Shell should be happy with that.
No, they know it, and consensus culture is also designed to be. It's what you do if you're big and you want to avoid the risks of taking hasty decisions. So I'd been looking for something else to do for a while, but we all have a bit of imposter syndrome, or a lot of imposter syndrome, and you don't really know what you're good at because you think, I'm an oil field guy, so that must be the only thing I can do. And then suddenly the seaweed idea came by.
I'm cutting you off, and I'm sorry, but that was always the hardest thing for us to do. Because in effect, we were private equity, but we were doing startup oil and gas companies, and we were doing early stage assets. Like we would literally drill the first horizontal well in a county. We kind of felt like our competitive advantage was half my partners at Kane Anderson were engineers. And so we could see kind of the latest and greatest in completion technology and go, wow, if that's working in the Bakken, it ought to work in the Southern Midland Basin. Where's some rock that looks similar? And we'd work with our management teams to help transfer that technology, if you will, and hope to beat the industry, because there are no great secrets in the industry, but beat it. And it was the hardest thing for us to do is when, like, if you walked in, you would talk through all these wonderful stories of all this great stuff. And we would always sit there and go, did Daniel actually get those assets and make this happen? Or was he gifted these assets and he's just a good manager of people? And that was always kind of the swing and misses for us. We'd find some people that just literally couldn't turn on the coffee pot themselves, because it's a different world when you leave Shell and you have 25 assistants for everything you possibly need to, hey, I'm going to go out there and raise seaweed.
Yeah. I mean, the areas that I worked while I was at Shell were never particularly close to the center. So I did a lot of different jobs at Shell that involved, starting somewhere with two people and a checkbook, basically, and then build things from scratch. So it didn't. I mean, it still feels occasionally you think, God, it'd be nice to just be able to call up like the legal department and have 17 great people at your beck and call. Sure, that's the bit that you forget about when you start a startup and you realize that now you're calling a law firm who want money for it, and because you're a tiny little customer, you're not getting their best guy.
Right.
So it's there's some frustrations around that, but.
It is interesting you bring that up, because that is, if there was a lesson learned in that, it was usually a division manager, not someone in corporate that had P&L responsibility, and the smaller number of people they were managing, usually the more entrepreneurial they were. Yeah. Took us a while to learn that. A
Yeah.
few mistakes
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're out there in very remote places and countries, then it's also
that's a good.
It's also self-created or self-inflicted. You don't want any help from the center.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the wife sees the thing on
kelp. So the wife
and
went to this lecture, and I stayed behind and took care of the kids, and then she went with a good friend of hers, a lovely lady scientist, and they went for a few glasses of wine, and so she was back very late, so I was a bit annoyed, and she was making fun of this scientist who'd been talking about planting like 9% of the world's seas with seaweed, and then we'd save the world with that. So she was making fun of him. So I was defending him because that's what we do as humans.
Yeah, pissed off. The wife had fun. You didn't. I totally get it. I was married. I was married for almost 25 years. I remember those days.
Yeah, so we had a good laugh, and then thought maybe we should learn something about this rather than having a big argument about something neither of us knew anything about. And so I read a couple of books on it and just got sucked in. Just this amazing species in this whole world that I had no idea existed. And this really wasn't with a sort of business entrepreneurial side. I was just autodidactically interested in this ecosystem that I knew nothing about. But then the more I delved into it, the more I suddenly realized here's a source of biomass that's chock-a-block with amazing molecules. Technically, the production of seaweed hasn't really moved forward since 1600 when the Japanese started doing it. Like, we've moved to Yamaha outboards instead of rowing, but that's about it. Everything else is done exactly the same. And as a consequence, in terms of markets, there's never the volume, there's never the consistency of quality to be able to take some of these potentially extraordinarily interesting products and put them in a space in a world where, if you produce 100 tons of something, of seaweed a year, who cares? Like, Cargill needs that every morning to start to be interested. And so the whole concept of scaling it and what you could do with that then suddenly lit up a light in my brain, because you're then building a really big scalable industry. Only at scale does it matter that it boosts biodiversity or draws down carbon, because who cares if you're doing that on a sort of 10-acre plot? And so the two things really molded, and you suddenly saw that you could create an industry of vast scale that also did great things.
So what year did you guys start? And give me 2 or 3 challenges in the starting that I probably wouldn't think of.
Well, it was 2019 that I first had this idea. And so I was finally set free by Shale on the 31st of December, 2019. Set up the company middle of January, did one scouting trip to Namibia, and then came back, and the world got shut away because of COVID. So that was a challenge, to put it mildly. Also, the fact that I was locked into selling my Shell shares just when the oil price was negative and they'd cut the dividend for the first time in, 70 or 100 years was also not great for my my little nest egg that was going to help me comfortably run my startup for a couple of years. So that sort of, I'd reckoned I had about 18 months of living the life we were accustomed to before I should feel stressed. That rapidly became 5 months, and people had told me, people with more experience had said, you're only going to be successful at raising money once you run out of your own money. And that was totally true. It just happened a lot faster than I had anticipated, which of course was very lucky with hindsight, because otherwise you would have wasted 18 months, and everything would have been delayed by 14 months.
My story then was, I get fired in April of 2020, and 2 days later, after I sober up, I'm sitting there going, I should figure out pen and paper, exactly what's going on in my financial world. So everything on paper, if everything was worth what it was supposedly worth, I was fine. Okay. I need to sell the plane. I can't fly around in the plane anymore, but all right, I'll do that. And then I went, well, what if these Kane Anderson funds that I'm invested in are worth 0? And, oil had just been minus 37. Mm. That was not, and if they don't pay you out for 10 years anyway, maybe that's not a bad assumption to have. So I looked at that, and I was still kind of like, okay, the kids will go to college. I can pay for the weddings and everything. That'll be all right. Then I said, well, because most of the time when you leave a private equity firm, whether you're fired or quitting or whatever, the firm always says, let us buy you out of your LP interests. And you go through the rigmarole. And if you can't agree on valuation, usually what it is, well, you just don't have to make future capital commitments to these funds. Well, Kane wouldn't let me out of that. They kept saying, well, that's an LP issue. And I go, I guarantee you, I would not have been the largest LP in these funds, individual LPs in these funds, if I wasn't the GP. But they wouldn't let me out of that. And so I was sitting there and I ran the math of what if I have to invest every single dollar they can call and all that's worth zero. And I calculated that I was worth $82,000 at that point.
Yeah.
And I was like, crap, that really sucks. So, fortunately, Kane just didn't do a lot in the way of deals, post me leaving. And eventually I was able to sell those and oil came back and they became worse stuff and all. But yeah, no, I feel you. There was not a lot of entrepreneurship going on in my mind at that point. Yeah. I'm like, I don't have any money.
Yeah, that focuses the brain.
It really does.
It really does. So that happened a few times. Then we raised a bit of cash, not big amounts. Then we're almost bankrupt again. I think when we finally got our first big investor, we had $70 left on the account. So,
oh, nice.
And that's as close as it gets to.
That being said, I love those stories in hindsight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we realized that at the time.
And so got an investor in. So what does the future hold? I mean, more fundraising to continue to grow. You guys in good shape now. What are you thinking you're doing?
Back then we were essentially going to investors and saying, here's this concept that might seem elegant, but it's never been done before. It's in an environment that is notoriously, like the ocean will kill everything you love and destroy absolutely everything you put into it sooner or later. So that was a tall sell, and you still had to prove that it worked technically, that the biology works, that the structure works, that you can process it, that you can make an end product that actually works, and that you can then sell that.
Give me one thing that you learned through all that I would go, oh crap, I never would have thought of that. There had to be one wild lesson learned.
Remember we were talking about harvesting?
Right.
So rewind to 1916, and the Allies are in a war with Germany again. I mean, you're going backwards in history.
Right.
And gunpowder was the main thing that you needed, and gunpowder is made with potassium. You're looking at me like, where the hell is he going with this?
No, I'm in. This is great. This has been fascinating.
So potassium at the time came pretty much exclusively from the salt mines in southern Germany, Salzburg. And basically what they did, they produced vast amounts of brine, NaCl and KCl. The NaCl became your table salt, and the KCl, they'd break down and sell the potassium, mostly for fertilizer, but also for gunpowder, so the basis of smokeless cordite. And so during the war, of course, the Germans stopped exporting that to their enemies, and the Allies had a major problem, which was that they were running out of gunpowder very rapidly. And potassium is called potassium from potash. A potash is these big pots of steel or iron in which people would burn seaweed on the beach, and the potash, was this super fertilizer before people found guano, and then before people developed ammonium nitrate. And so the Royal Navy, who was the procurer of potassium and gunpowder, turned to the seaweed industry, basically some peasants in Ramsey and in Bretagne collecting this stuff off the beach. And they, of course, couldn't produce enough potassium for this, so they put out a tender. And a company from the US called the Hercules Powder Company picked up this tender and won it on the basis of mowing giant kelp offshore California. And so within 4 months, they built four vessels. The first one was called the Bacchus, after the god of wine, because you chop kelp up and they call it kelp liquor. And they'd ferment it, and it was actually alcoholic.
Have you ever had any?
I haven't tried.
Sounds like we ought to.
If you ferment kelp, it really stinks quite badly.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, no, we use the kelp fluid like a sort of skin ointment. It's great. We drink it, but fermented, I haven't tried yet. The cash flow has never been that low.
It hasn't been that bad.
so they built these 4 wooden vessels that were cutting the canopy of the kelp, were chopping it into soup right there on the vessel and putting it into little shuttles that would go back to a place called Gunpowder Point, where they had the biggest tank farm in the world. This is 1916. So not Baku oil fields, but kelp, Gunpowder Point, California, all built out of giant redwoods. And there they were doing this fermentation process to get the potassium and then acetates for airplane paints, and I think about 40 or 42 different products for the war effort. And so that whole concept of speed of ingenuity triggered by need has always inspired me. Like this story of how quickly you design something that's never been done before, and it works, and pretty much every single shot fired from the end of 1916 until the armistice, giant kelp.
No way.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's always my point. America does that stuff really well.
Yeah.
You know, kind of in the similar light that I always talk about, you know, when I talk to the British girlfriend, because she'll sit there and talk about how schools are horrible around here. And I go, not the top 5%. I mean, we go out, if there is a kid in America that is great at basketball, we get them to the NBA. If there's a kid out there that's really smart doing stuff, I don't care where they are, we get them to MIT. We do that better than anyone else. So we can handle the catastrophe and let's call it the super outsizing or whatever. We do that stuff really well. Day to day, maybe not so much. But so that's really cool. Well, how do people find out about y'all, or do you want people finding out about you?
No, we want people to find out about us. I mean, we've got the website. We have, I think, a pretty extraordinarily open team in terms of we look at our sort of returns framework, and we inherited this from our seed investor, something called the 4 R's, where you look at returns, not just financial returns, but you look in order. You look at return on inspiration. So how much of what you're doing is firing people up, your own people, your neighbors, your kids. This stuff matters. It just makes what you do easier, and it makes you more productive at what you do when you're inspired by what you're doing, and it makes everybody's support for you around you, whether that be investors or regulators or neighbors or suppliers, that also matters. So return on inspiration, I think, is a heavily underrated item in the management world, probably because you can't quantify it in a KPI, which I think it would be a depressing world if we could quantify inspiration as a KPI. So that's sort of number one. And then you talk about return on natural capital, which is this concept of saying you are operating an asset that has nature in it. Are you making that better, or are you degrading that? And then you talk about return on social capital, which isn't a sort of, it doesn't mean socialism. It just means social capital is what you've got in your company and around you in terms of people, and are you making them better in skill sets, in reliability, in loyalty, or are you degrading them? And then return on financial capital is obviously the key one. So those are the 4 sort of things that we look at.
What's the website? Spell it out, because about 75% of the people that'll listen to this will hear it as opposed to watching it.
Yeah, website is kelp.blue, so KELP.blue, the color.
Nice.
Yeah.
Daniel, this was cool of you to come on. I enjoyed this. Sorry you had to put up with me and my random questions.
No, this was great. I like that.
But anyway, we'll give a shout out to Matt Steele for introducing us.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
It's hard to give Matt a shout out. So anytime we can, we should take that.
Yeah.